Blaze News, The Mandate. I'm Jill Savage. Matthew is out on the left coast, but don't worry, we've flown in our D.C. correspondent, Chris Bedford. Welcome in.
Thanks for having me. This is good to be here in Texas. I mean, I brought the rain.
You did.
We don't have any of that in D.C., but I've been praying for it, doing the dances and everything I can.
I can't believe it's actually hotter in Washington, D.C. than it is in Dallas, Texas. But, things have been heating up in the news as well. We've heard all the stories that Iran could have sleeper cells all over the country. Here's what CBS News said yesterday on the Iranian nationals that were apprehended after Trump bombed their nuclear facilities.
Over the past 48 hours, ICE officials have arrested 11 Iranian nationals spanning 8 states nationwide. Among them, 5 possessed previous criminal convictions, their crimes ranging from grand larceny to drug and firearm possessions. Also among those apprehended, Ribvar Karimi. While arresting him in northern Alabama, ICE officials say they found his Islamic Republic of Iran Army identification card and allege he served as an Iranian sniper between 2018 and 2021.
For more, let's go ahead and bring in Andrew Arthur. He's a former immigration judge and a resident fellow at the Center for Immigration Studies. So, Andrew, thanks so much for coming back on the show today. Last week, we had Kyle Scheidler on, and he was telling us that members of Hezbollah were let into the U.S. because Border Patrol was so worried that they might catch COVID while they were in custody that they just let them go right on through. So just take us through how you think that some of these Iranians could have gotten into the country, and we have the situation that we're facing right now.
Sure, absolutely. It's important to note the fact that under the Biden administration, between February 2021 and November 2024, which is the last report we have, 1,750 different Iranians were apprehended entering the United States illegally. There were more than 7,000 who were stopped at the ports of entry. Those apprehensions represent a 20-fold increase over the 7-year period prior to President Biden taking office. So we saw a huge number of Iranians come to the United States. It's especially problematic because they have universal conscription in Iran that they very actively implement. So it's difficult for a military-age man to get out of the country. So you've got a whole lot of people coming in, getting caught, many of whom are within that military-age cohort. Makes you wonder, how it was they got out and how it was they got here. But here's the much more important danger. At the same time that the Biden administration was releasing millions of aliens apprehended into the United States, 1.9 million others snuck by Border Patrol agents. They were overwhelmed. Don't blame the agents, to make their way into the United States. And as former Border Patrol Chief Jason Owens, then Border Patrol Chief Jason Owens, told CBS in 2024, it was those gotaways, as they're referred to, that keep him up at night. And it would have been very easy for the Iranian government to sneak hundreds, thousands of other assets into this country while the Biden administration was asleep at the switch.
You were an immigration judge, but now there's a huge fight back and forth. It seems like the federal judiciary is trying to assert itself over the immigration courts. And the way it's being reported in newspapers is that these immigrants or these deportees are being denied due process. But they seem to be skipping over the actual orders from immigration courts in the past. Have you seen that tension previously during your time on the bench? And how do you see that jurisdiction kind of unfolding over the coming months and years?
So I served under George H.W. Bush all the way through Barack Obama. Each one of those presidents was zealous about enforcing the immigration laws. So I didn't see any pushback from the federal courts. I didn't see any pushback from the administration on anything that I did. But when people talk about due process, Chris, they miss that important modifier due. Not every alien in the United States is the same. Green card holders have more rights to more process than illegal entrants do. In fact, the Supreme Court held in 2020 that aliens apprehended entering illegally have only those rights that Congress has given them, which aren't many rights at all. So it's always good to take this with a grain of salt. And remember what Thomas Jefferson said, the man who reads nothing knows more than the man who reads nothing but newspapers.
So I look at this and say, okay, we all know the Biden regime let millions upon millions of illegals into this country. Now we're trying to go through and unwind it. But how do we estimate how many people that are here that are wanting to do harm? Is there any way that we can even prioritize getting people out of this country? Because this seems like such a jumbled mess that we're in right now.
Yeah, that's the worst part, especially when you're talking about those 1,750 Iranians who were apprehended. We don't have diplomatic relations with Iran. They took over our embassy and we haven't been back since then. So consequently, we're largely reliant upon the aliens themselves to tell us whether they're good people or bad people. That's how ridiculous this vetting system is. In fact, Rodney Scott, who is now the newly confirmed commissioner of CBP, testified before the House Judiciary Committee that the vetting that we do on the vast majority of people at the border is worthless, which is why we detain them. Through the course of, being in front of immigration judges like me and, being in DHS detention, we can get a better idea on who these people are. But when you turn them around within 2 to 3 hours after they show up and simply release them into the United States, there's no way to do that robust vetting. The other thing to keep in mind when you're talking about those terrorists, those Hezbollah members, and other people who were apprehended, for the better part of 3 years, the Biden administration got hits on people, but it didn't know what to do with the classified information that it got back. And in many of those cases, it simply released those people into the United States, didn't verify whether it belonged to the individual in question, didn't really figure out who those people were. That was stopped, to Alejandro Mayorkas's credit, by a memo that he issued early in 2024. But by then, the damage had been done. The IRGC, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, is the power in Iran, and they are ruthless and they are skilled. So if they wanted to move people into the United States in sleeper cells to stay here, well, one, President Obama gave them a whole lot of cash to keep those people alive, and two, the Biden border disaster facilitated their entry into this country.
So with someone like Karimi, he served in the Iranian military as a sniper, initially came here legally on a marriage visa, is married to a woman in Alabama who is heavily pregnant. As an immigration judge, how do these sorts of details, including the fact that he didn't actually change his status as is legally required to stay in the country, how do these other factors, which play heavily in the press, figure into an immigration judge's decision on whether or not someone is considered able to stay, or whether their military background with the country that we have had conflict with recently, their involvement, their family here? How do all of these factors, if at all, figure into the kind of ruling that you expect to see from an immigration court?
That's a great question, because those factors don't make him any more deportable. As I understand it, he came in on a K-1 fiance visa, never adjusted his status. That makes him removable. So when he goes to immigration court, what he's probably going to do is he's going to apply for a green card. That's a discretionary determination. And the immigration judge can consider all of those factors: his service in the Iranian army, the potential risk that he poses to the United States, in granting or denying that application, the exercise of discretion. And the ICE attorney who represents the interests of the American people in that court will be sure to bring all of that and more up in the course of that hearing.
Well, we look at border czar Tom Homan. He went on Pod Force One. He's going through with ICE and tracking down hundreds of thousands of children that were trafficked here in the United States. It's the worst of the worst. So how do you go through and even make a dent into what we're seeing here?
It's the same as the way that you eat the dinosaur, one spoonful at a time. But, there's nobody with a bigger appetite for such investigations than Tom Homan. Tom's been a friend of mine for years. He is dogged, he's determined, and he's skilled. He came up, through the Border Patrol ranks to be acting director of the agency, and now border czar. But when you talk about those kids, what happened in real time was shameful, and the lack of attention that was paid by the majority of the national press about those kids was reprehensible. It was unacceptable. It's unforgivable. We knew, in fact, I wrote in real time that there were real problems. There were kids being released into this country who never showed up in immigration court. If they were at least before a judge like me, and I actually did have jurisdiction over a child center, I could at least, keep tabs on that child and make sure that the child was being well cared for. And I could, usher the sponsor out of the room if I needed to or had any questions. But yeah, that was just one of the many things that inspectors general at Health and Human Services, which has jurisdiction for sheltering those kids, and at DHS found that the Biden administration did wrong. And yet nothing ever changed. It wasn't until Donald Trump and Tom Homan came along and Bobby Kennedy that we really got serious about finding those kids, making sure they're safe, getting them with their families, and potentially removing them back to their families.
When I started at the Daily Caller in 2010, there were basically 3 games in town on immigration enforcement. It was Center for Immigration Studies, Senator Jeff Sessions, and one of his staffers, Stephen Miller. No one else in the GOP wanted to talk about it. No one was going on about it. A lot of the nonprofit world maybe did a little bit on it, but it certainly wasn't something that they focused on. How has that landscape changed, and how have you seen the Overton window shift in American politics, being one of the originals and then being at the forefront of it since?
Yeah, Chris, it's interesting because, during those 4 years of Biden and even the last 2 years of Trump, I went up to testify before Congress and I was called every name but a child of God. I was asked what books I read and who I associated with. It was kind of ridiculous because those weren't actually the topics of the hearing. Unfortunately, a lot of the people on the outside of the immigration issue were now inside the immigration issue, but we've seen polling on this shift. In fact, I've seen it in my congressional testimony. If you look at the polls, regardless of whether it's Pew or Harvard Harris or The Economist, all of them show that immigration enforcement is Donald Trump's best policy. In fact, 80% of people in the most recent Harvard Harris poll said that they supported a plan to remove criminal aliens out of the United States. That would have been unthinkable in 2018, 2019 under Trump. And for what it's worth, it really wasn't a big deal in 2021 or 2022 under Biden. It was only when cities like New York started to feel the pinch and mayors like Eric Adams spoke up and said, this is costing us billions, something's got to change, that all of that shifted. People now, can drive down the street, or they can see it in their tax bill, or they can, take a look at their kids' classrooms, which are now overwhelmed by more than 500,000 migrant students, and see the impact. So yeah, the Overton window in this case has shifted a whole lot to the right, a whole lot in favor of Donald Trump. Speaking of Donald Trump, he really is the one that drove this. One of the best things about, having candidate Trump was he was making many of the same points that we were making. In fact, he tweeted out something or truthed out something that I wrote yesterday. I was pretty proud of that. But, he is now driving the narrative on this. And when people push, he pushes back. He doesn't stand down. And he is making people aware constantly. Trish McLaughlin, the DHS press secretary, Tom Homan, there could be no better advocate for immigration enforcement, nor one who's not going to be pushed around than Tom Homan is.
Yeah, it is a great group of people. My favorite thing about Stephen Miller, you can ask him any question and he will take it right back to immigration and give you a good answer every single time.
Even in social situations. It's unreal.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Andrew Arthur, thanks so much.
Thank you so much for having me today.
Don't go anywhere. One of our favorites, Terry Schilling, will be up next. Oh, we've talked about it before. The Rio reset is right around the corner. It's one of the greatest threats to the dollar in the global domination in over 40 years. It's coming up on July 6th. It's going to be with all the BRICS nations. Russia, China, India, Iran. They're expected to unveil their plans to circumvent the U.S. dollar and try and crater its value. Now, they've been laying the groundwork for a while. We've seen it so many times. Central banks have been moving away from the dollar, away from our bonds, and they've been buying gold. So how can you protect your IRA or 401k from the fallouts of these events? Well, look at diversifying with gold from Birch Gold Group. Historically, we know that gold has been a safe haven in times of uncertainty. That's definitely going on right now. So you can get a free info kit on tax-sheltered gold IRAs. Text the word Jill to 989898 because we know that July 6th marks the monumental shift that's happening between the nations. They control 1/3 of the world's GDP. So arm yourself with information to diversify your retirement savings. Text Jill to the number 989898 and claim your free info kit from Birch Gold. The culture wars still matter. Everyone on the right wants to see Planned Parenthood get defunded, and it might actually happen. It's currently in the big, beautiful bill. Gender transitions would also be defunded as it's currently written. So joining us now is Terry Schilling. He's the president of the American Principles Project, here to talk about this, where the pro-life movement is headed, and we still have to ask the question, what is a woman? So Terry, thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Thanks so much for having me, Jill.
So tell me, is this true? Tell me that Congress is going to finally defund Planned Parenthood. We waited long enough for this, Terry.
Oh man, Jill, it's been decades, and this has been something that the conservative movement, the pro-life movement, Republicans in general have been trying to secure for literally decades. And it looks promising right now. It is included in both bills, in both the House, the passed version in the House, and also in the Senate. The big question is whether or not this provision passes the bird bath. Now, this is a esoteric parliamentarian rule that basically says that all of these things have to be financial in nature and that they can't be policy-related matters. That's why they can get around the 60-vote filibuster threshold. But I'm very excited. I'm very hopeful and optimistic that we're finally going to get this done. So I would be placing my bet on the yes side of this debate.
Terry, you look like you got some sun. Were you golfing recently?
I was golfing, but more importantly, I spent last week in the middle of nowhere in the wild, wild west known as Wyoming without any cell phone reception. Chris, I rode a horse through a river and up a mountain. I don't know a lot of guys that can say that, so that's I'm a big boy now.
That's amazing. Now, you say Republicans have been trying to defund Planned Parenthood for decades. I don't really get the same feeling. I feel like they say that on the campaign trail, and they say, oh, we tried, but they don't actually. It feels like a lot of Republicans were actually really disappointed when the decision came down, striking down Roe v. Wade, because now they actually have to vote on it. Now they have to take their consequences from the legions of the armies of white women marching on them from Mordor to take away their jobs. Do you feel like they're actually serious this time? Are you getting from leadership that they're serious? And with the Senate parliamentarian stripping out almost anything that has to do with policy, are you still hopeful that that defunding Planned Parenthood will actually survive a Harry Reid parliamentarian who's not really that excited about Republicans' ideas?
No, look, I'm still optimistic that this will remain in the bill. There's too much political support behind it, primarily from the American people, by the way. Over 60% of Americans do not want tax dollars going towards funding abortion procedures. So I'm optimistic on that front. But this is the elephant in the room, for lack of a better comparison. Republicans have been terrible. They've been lagging indicators in the culture war. Now, I will tell you that has changed. And it's changed because this is actually in the bill. We haven't seen this since the attempt to repeal Obamacare when John McCain screwed us. But I'm optimistic. I think Donald Trump has shown Republicans how to fight back in the culture war and how to win. And obviously, there's room for improvement in this Republican Party. But I think it's a big deal that this has passed the House with a very slim majority that we have here. You know, there's a lot of things that didn't get cut in the budget, but this has remained in there. And so I think it's a big tell that the Republican Party might actually start to becoming a good team player on the culture war front.
All right, so you both have mentioned Roe versus Wade getting overturned. It was actually the 3-year anniversary of that yesterday. So Terry, just take us through how much progress or not have we made in these 3 years?
And in the states, too, and convincing people to actually that this is something worth fighting for.
Well, and you both bring up very good points. So to be frank, there's been some good progress. We are cutting back taxpayer funding in the red states for abortions. We are restricting it. We are passing common sense laws like in Texas and in Florida. Texas has a great law. It's a heartbeat law, and they've essentially eliminated all of abortions. But here's where it gets very frustrating. Post Roe v. Wade, post Dobbs, where we overturned Roe v. Wade, we've actually seen a 10% increase in abortions across America. And that's according to the Charlotte Lozier Institute, which is part of Susan B. Anthony, Pro-Life America. And essentially what's causing that is the blue states have passed what's known as shield laws. that allow them to recruit and advertise for abortion services in the red states and the border states that are along them. But it also allows their pharmaceutical companies and their doctors to mail out abortion drugs to the red states. So look, there's a lot more work that needs to be done. And frankly, I don't know how this remains a states issue. I know that President Trump made a promise on that, and I don't expect him to change that promise. But I do hope that in the future, we will bring more attention to the fact that these blue states have weaponized their laws to make sure that we're aborting more babies. I found it rich yesterday seeing Eric Swalwell and Gavin Newsom and J.B. Pritzker talking about how reproductive rights are under attack when there are more abortions today than there were before Dobbs. Right? I want to repeat that. There are more abortions today than there were before Dobbs. So what are Democrats not happy about? Do they want 20% more abortions? Do they want 50% increase in abortions? How many more abortions is it going to take to satisfy the Democratic Party? And the answer is none. The answer is they will never be satisfied until every baby is under threat from abortion. And it's just unfortunate. These guys are all charlatans. I will just say, Americans they have a very difficult to understand mindset on abortion, but it's also simple. They don't like late-term abortions. They don't like any abortion after 15 weeks. Essentially, there's a 2/3 majority for that. But anything outside of that in the first trimester, they're pretty ambivalent and they don't want to take anything. And we've got to figure out a way to counteract, especially these ballot initiatives that are amending these state constitutions to allow for any abortion up until the moment of birth.
And one place where American Principles Project has actually made serious inroads in the culture and with voters is on transgender issues. APP was among the first, if not the first, on the Republican side to be pushing these and campaign advertisements. And then you got the president to sign on to what became his most effective ad. You've also protested in front of hospitals to try to draw attention to children's hospitals where genital mutilation is happening. What is going on with these hospitals that are seemingly ignoring the rules that now the FBI is investigating for genital mutilation of children?
Well, President Trump has been very strong on this issue, and he signed several executive orders to ban these and make these procedures, especially mostly for children, to make these illegal. And he's instructed the Department of Justice to investigate these hospitals that are performing these procedures on children and to make sure that they're no longer doing it. But Chris, this is a fight that we have a little bit more ways to go. We still have to ban these procedures nationwide. The nature of these things, it's the sex change industry, it's the abortion industry. These are industries. And what that means is that they are for profit, and they take those profits and they try to make more profits. So they take the money that they make in California with all the sex change procedures they give to children, all the abortion that they perform, they take those profits and then they put that into lobbying in the red states. They put that into lobbying in the nation's capital so that they can keep expanding. They can keep expanding their culture of death so they can make more money off of killing people and sterilizing them. So we've got to treat these issues at the threats that they are. We've got to completely defund any gender transition procedure through the federal budget. That is also in the big, beautiful bill, which we're very happy about. I really think that if we can defund these procedures nationally and make sure that taxpayer dollars aren't going to funding this stuff, I think you're going to save a lot more people all of the harm and strife that they've been suffering under after going through these procedures. I know they say they're happier, but poll after poll and survey after survey and study after study show that there are no long-term benefits to these procedures.
So gender transition, that is the serious topic, but they get a lot of cover from a lot of these pro athletes out there, Terry. We know that Simone Biles, she just deleted her X account. She had that clash back and forth with Riley Gaines talking about, the transgenders, they should be able to compete in women's sports. Well, it's 2025, Terry, and we still have to ask, what is a woman, right? Why is this still so controversial? But I guess the good news is that they finally push back.
And why is Simone such a quitter? She always quits under pressure.
Chris, I like to think of it in terms of self-cancellation, right? Under the Biden administration, it was coerced cancellation. They were putting pressure on X and Facebook and all these major corporations to cancel people, get them fired, cancel their accounts, get them off of online so we can't have these arguments. But now, in the beautiful golden era of Donald Trump, progressives who are pushing more men and women's sports, more sex changes for kids, They are self-canceling. It's absolutely beautiful. But listen, I just want to say, it is so dumb to go up against anyone when it comes to arguing for and pushing for more men and women's sports, more sex changes for kids. No one wants it. No one ever wanted it, right? It was something that the left tried to sneak through, and they almost got away with it. But the other thing I'll say is taking on Riley Gaines is just really stupid. She's super nice. She's super sweet. But more importantly, she's incredibly smart, and she's fierce. I would not want to get into a debate or an argument with Riley Gaines. She would win. And Simone Biles obviously is getting a lot of pressure from her friends and allies. This is really, guys, Jill and Chris, this is really an elite-driven problem. The elites are pushing this on the American people, but poll after poll shows that 78, 79, 80% of Americans are opposed to men and girls sports, are opposed to giving kids sex change procedures. And so until the Democrats and the elites on the left figure that out, they're going to continue to lose power and lose elections.
So they have to keep on self-deporting from Twitter, but speaking of deportation, I learned recently from a close source that there's a rule at your neighborhood Mexican restaurant that only one person is not allowed to eat the fully loaded nachos. Terry, how did you find this out? How did you find out this rule? Was it an ugly scene?
It's funny, Chris, because I learned this because I was on a date with my wife, and I noticed that she kept eating all of the fully loaded nachos, and I was just getting little tiny chunks of meat, like barely any, like
your
little teeny tiny chunks
wife?
of meat. Yeah, and she was eating all of them, and I asked the server if that was allowed, and he said it wasn't. And so I've been reminding her every time we go out for Mexican food that she can't eat all the fully loaded nachos.
You're doing God's work, sir.
This is exactly why, by the way, this is exactly why Terry is on the show today, because I knew Bedford would be here, and I said, you know what? We're going to have some fun today. We're going to talk about culture wars. We're going to fix the problems. We're going to right all the wrongs. But we're also going to talk about some fully loaded nachos, apparently. Terry?
They're great. Thank you, guys.
Tell me where I need to go next time I'm in town.
Guapos in Arlington. Right. It's really great. It's in Shirlington.
Guapos.
Village of Shirlington. It's fantastic.
You're bringing back dark memories of Guapos.
I love it. I absolutely love it. Thanks so much, Terry. We'll see you next time.
Thank you, guys.
Well, we've been talking about the big, beautiful bill. We will put Bedford on the spotlight. He will be up next with his Beltway Brief. Well, he came all the way from Washington, D.C., so it's time for the Beltway Brief. One big, beautiful bill is getting gutted piece by piece by the Senate parliamentarian. Now, it's never a good time to be a panican, but what's happening in D.C. right now, and how does it affect Trump's agenda? So, Chris, it is your Beltway Brief, but I have to ask, for everybody that doesn't live in the Beltway, what the heck is a Senate parliamentarian, and why do I need to care?
So a Senate parliamentarian is someone who you only have to care about in the Senate or right now. And there's a couple other examples over the past where they make these different rulings. This is an officer of the Senate, an employee of the Senate, appointed by the Senate Majority Leader, who serves at the will of the Senate Majority Leader. The current one is Elizabeth McDonough. She was appointed by the late great boxer, Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid of Nevada, who actually overruled her pretty quickly after giving her the job. But her point is she serves the president of the Senate, which right now is always the vice president, and she tells you what you're allowed to do and what you're not allowed to do. The House of Representatives is basically a free-for-all. It's just a bunch of guys. It feels like
it sometimes. Yeah.
One of the first things, there are some fantastic congressmen out there, but one of the first things I noticed when I came to Washington is if you want to explain something to a congressman, you probably should bring a big piece of paper and some crayons, and you can kind of go through it. And the only difference in the Senate is that they're better dressed and better fundraisers. The Senate Parliament, but they have a lot more rules over there. They have the filibuster, which is actually kind of extremely important. I mean, one of the reasons we're dealing with so many federal judge problems, the insanity of the federal judges over the last 9 months or 8 months of the administration, what month is it? 7 months of the administration, is because Harry Reid nuked the filibuster in 2013 on federal judges. None of those guys would have gotten 60 votes because they're crazy activists. But they were at loggerheads. The parties were becoming less regional and more ideological. Liberals and the Democrats, no more conservative Democrats. Conservatives and the Republicans, still a lot of liberal Republicans, unfortunately for them. And they just weren't working together at all. So Senator Reid said, we're getting rid of it. And then a few short years later, when Mitch McConnell wanted to put people on the Supreme Court and the Democrats said, no, 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 he said, fine. We're going to expand Harry Reid's nuking of the filibuster to include Supreme Court judges. The problem now is, while this person only advises, and while this person can be overruled, it is kind of actually important that the Senate have different procedures and different rules in order to maintain that cooling chamber aspect that they have. And there's not an appetite in the Republican Senate, especially not in the Democrats. There's never an appetite in the minority to break out any more legs of the filibuster stool, the ability of the minority to exercise control. Now, in this case, I think the Senate parliamentarian is really overreaching. There's a lot of good examples of things that very clearly have to do with the budget and how much the federal government is spending in here, that she's peered into the hearts of Republicans and decided, this is something that seems to be more of a policy decision than a budget decision. You're not tinkering around the edges. You're trying to change American policy. So we're not going to do that. And that's been extremely frustrating to folks online. You see a lot. It's been very frustrating to folks on Capitol Hill. It's been very frustrating to Congressman Chip Roy, a frequent guest in the show, and someone who's actually one of the very intelligent congressmen. It's been very frustrating to Senator Mike Lee, who spent weeks and weeks trying to perfectly coordinate and tailor his REINS Act, which we've talked about in the show, which would only now have an impact on put Senate oversight and federal regulations that are so massive in their economic costs, they actually impact the tax base of the United States. That's how he did it. And the Senate parliamentarian still said, no, go back to the drawing board. So there's frustration, but you see a lot online about people saying, well, this person could be overruled by J.D. Vance. This person could be fired by John Thune. What's the problem here? This person's back is facing the American people. They're just facing towards the Senate president. And they're an advisor. They're not a constitutional officer. And those people are correct. But when you look at senators like Tom Tillis in North Carolina, who for some reason has no primary opponent that I've heard of, you look at Murkowski, when you look at Collins, when you look at McConnell, they're not interested in changing this. And once you kick over that leg of the stool, you're going to see more defections from the GOP in what is already a difficult-to-pass bill.
I don't even understand what they're doing in North Carolina. It seems like so easy right now with Tom Tillis, but I don't know that that's going to happen. Let's go ahead and get to a quick game of in versus out. What's being cut and what do people need to keep an eye on? Because there are actually some good things, crazy enough, in this big, beautiful bill.
Oh, there's phenomenal things. I mean, the president's entire agenda, and in the first block of the show, we were talking about the immigration enforcement. All of that is in here. They don't have the beds, they don't have the men, they don't have the resources to be able to actually execute on President Trump's agenda. You hear people complaining, well, there's not as many deportations as we expected. It's like, well, that's correct, because there simply are not the resources. It's incredible what Tom Homan's been able to do. That's in there. We're going to see the largest tax hike in American history if the taxes don't make it through the Senate parliamentarian and don't make it through the bill. Those are in the big, beautiful bill right now.
Who do I need to email right now?
The Senate parliamentarian, Elizabeth McDonough. There's a lot of things that have been cut. I mean, there was the $6.4 billion budget of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau was slashed in the original big, beautiful bill. That was something that made everyone happy. That bureau does not answer to Congress. That bureau is separate. That's Elizabeth Warren nightmare. It was set up to just fund itself. It essentially sues companies and then funnels that money towards left-wing nonprofits. It's a disaster, and that was deemed to be too much policy. There was a $1.4 billion cut to the Federal Reserve, and particularly hitting salaries over there. That was deemed, for whatever reason, to be policy. There was a $770 million cost-saving measure that would have transferred the company for accounting, the public company accounting oversight board's authority to the SEC, which could easily administer this. That apparently was deemed too much of a policy. The REINS Act that we talked about, and one of the most egregious is a penalty on states over food stamps. Now, states that have an over 6% error rate on food stamps, like, what's an error rate? And if you ask Google, they say, well, that's either underpayments or overpayments. But Overpayments outnumber underpayments by more than 6.5 to 1. So this is basically saying states that they're giving away money fraudulently without the proper oversight to food stamp, giving away federal money, have to share a higher level of the burden. And that was cut and deemed to be policy. That would have saved $12.8 billion in waste a year. But nobody wants to actually be held accountable for these sort of things, and the parliamentarian cut it. The big thing that everyone's waiting on, that was supposed to come down last night, but still hasn't come out, is the Senate parliamentarians' rulings on the Finance Committee's work. We've talked about that. It started in the House Ways and Means. Now it's with Senate Finance. Those are the tax cuts. Those are no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, but they're also just the massive hikes across the board that are set to come in when Trump's first term tax cuts expire. These are typically okay by the parliamentarian, but she's with the Byrd rule, but she's on the warpath right now. So if those come out, I suspect this whole thing collapses.
All right, so you said 1.4 million for the Federal Reserve. We can go ahead and just end the Fed. We can cut way more over there. I've always been all for that. Let's keep going. Let's keep going. All right, so we had Representative Andy Ogles on yesterday who was talking about one big beautiful barbecue potentially because they are threatening to make lawmakers. Donald Trump has said, you guys are not going home if this doesn't get done. You need to stay there. I don't know if everybody's going to be hanging out with you in Washington, D.C. over the 4th of July. What do you think the odds are that this is actually going to happen and everything's going to get through?
It's getting harder by the day. Time is not a friend to this bill. And the House of Representatives is rightfully upset, and a lot of senators are upset, and the American people are rightly upset, that the big, beautiful bill has taken so many hits over this week from the parliamentarian. But this is the only show in town. This is the only helicopter leaving Saigon. You need 51 votes. You're not going to get 60. So usually the Senate made this bill worse, but they always do, basically on everything except for Obamacare repeal, which they didn't pass in the end. And people who are saying, well, I'm not going to vote for it now, this is the show. This is your ride. This is the only way to get the Trump administration's agenda funded and across the finish line. It's getting uglier by the day. I don't think it's going to remotely be an Obamacare type thing where the opposition party was able to frame it before the people who passed it and were able to campaign on that, unless there's massive cuts to Medicaid that really impact rural hospitals, which they're now working to figure out. We talked about that earlier this week. So all this kvetching is for kind of nothing. This is it. And there's no other option. And if they could restart the whole process and delay the Trump administration by another couple of months, but time, like I said, is just not something that's been improving this thing. They need those resources. So making people stay in town is the equivalent of holding them underwater when they're in Congress and saying, I'm not going to let you breathe. They hate it so much. DC's in the middle of a heat wave. It's a brutal place to be at the moment. And I'm leaving town as soon as I can. But making Congress, making the Senate actually work is going to be something that potentially pushes us over the finish line. People I talked to in the White House team were extremely confident at the beginning of the week. Their confidence is a little more shaky right now.
We're just trying to make sure that we get tax cuts, everybody, right? And they're in Congress and they're going, oh, we have to work? We have to get this. We have to get this out to the American people? Bedford, what are we doing?
Oh, yeah, they're so lazy. It's incredible. They definitely actually probably envy the legislature of Texas, which has other jobs and heads home for most of the year.
Well, you know what? Things could be worse. We could be looking, like we will just in a minute here, at New York City. Things there have gotten progressively worse. I use that word on purpose. We'll get your responses to what is going on, all of the craziness in New York City after this. Oh, just when you think things can't get worse. Well, Democrats are the kind of people who will cry anti-Semitism and then vote for this guy.
Mayor Mamdani, would you welcome Prime Minister Netanyahu to New York City for whatever he comes for, given the U.S. is not a signatory to the ICC, so he can travel to the U.S., unlike a lot of other countries. Would Mayor Mamdani welcome Benjamin Netanyahu to the city?
No. As mayor, New York City would arrest Benjamin Netanyahu. This is a city that our values are in line with international law. It's time that our actions are also.
Even though the U.S. is not a signatory to the ICC?
No, it's time that we actually step up and make clear what we are willing to do to showcase the leadership that is sorely missing in the federal administration.
Well, that sounds nice, right? I think that when you look at this, it's like, oh man, Are they sure? Do they want to redo on this vote? Chris, this is not great news here that we're looking through and he's like, oh, we can have socialism and we can have like public grocery stores and free childcare. The list is so long for all of his socialist agenda. This is what the people of New York City wanted.
He's a globalist. He's an internationalist. His mother describes him as more someone who identifies as Ugandan and Indian than American. He has different accents he breaks out depending on who he's talking to. Even his friends in the corporate media have talked about that sort of aspects of how he wants to do is just fit in. He's a chameleon entirely. He has all these different policies, which we can go into in your next question if you want, because they're not great. They're not great.
They are not great. You know what? But he will fit definitely in the Democratic Party because he got all the different accents from Hillary Clinton.
She's good at that. You know, I have a Southern friend who does that code switching. Whether a waitress comes up, he just switches right into it. It's pretty impressive, and he's going to have to testify soon. And I'm curious, is he going to do that on the stand?
All right, so that is obviously what everybody was talking about last night. So I asked on X, there's chaos in New York City. Is Zohran Mamdani the new face of the Democratic Party? Let's get to your answers now. Bill and Marcus replied that we will never forget 2001. We forgot 2025. That didn't take too long with a picture of the World Trade Center bombing. Now, I'm not saying he's a jihadist, but I am saying that you went through and you see that 19 hijackers happen to be all one religion, and now we're voting for that guy who is the same religion 24 years later.
Someone who's openly partisan towards Intifada, someone who's down with the days of rage, someone who is a defender of different terrorist groups, someone who's against basically largely American values. And, you know, you kind of feel that when you go to Manhattan or London or Berlin or a lot of these once great capitals of the world, that they're not made greater anymore. They're made lessened by the unfettered immigration policy that we've seen, that we were talked about in the A block. They're international cities, but really large aspects of them are just becoming international slums in a way that even the New York of history that you talk about, the Fievel Goes West, New York, or American Tale, had that aspect, but it still had a deeply solid American core, and that's what made that city so great. And that's what all these people came here to be a part of. And that is starting to change.
The Fievel Goes West, though. You know, that gets me every time. Let's go ahead and get to Terrence. He says that Cuomo is there to make Mamdani look like the better choice. It looks like the old bait and switch. I mean, when you have Cuomo out there that's like, hey, remember this guy from COVID? Remember how terrible he was and he got fired and he got ousted? Oh, but now he's the better choice?
I've got the Cuomo poster he put out hung in the office. Remember that propaganda poster where they had to climb the mountain of COVID? It is surreal. It is nightmarish. The longer you stare at it, the weirder and stranger it gets. But yeah, this is someone who is significantly worse than Andrew Cuomo. He wants to end cash bail. Remember how that's worked out. He wants to abolish the NYPD. He wants to abolish cooperation with ICE. He wants to abolish prisons. He wants to abolish medical bills. I'm actually fine with that. He wants to abolish private health care. He wants to abolish private gun ownership. And some of the things that he's for safe injection sites. Now, if you've been to San Francisco or Denver lately, it actually doesn't work out. Or Oregon, all of that. Turns out, kid, that people don't use drugs the way you did in your dorm room. A lot of people fall off society, abandon their families, and become criminals. He's for legalizing hookers. He's for legalizing drugs. He's for legalizing child genital mutilation, which I guess is not that strange coming from Uganda.
With that note, Jim is going to round out our replies. No, he is not. The establishment on both sides will rally behind Eric Adams. Now, he's not great, but better than what happens with this guy. Listen, I did not see this coming, that we would go on this show and say, you know what? I think we want Eric Adams now. I think everybody out there in New York City needs to vote for Eric Adams. He did at least get it right with some of the policies that he has out there in New York City now.
Yeah, Eric Adams is much more kind of person who New York deserves. He's the classic kind of, he's maybe a little corrupt. Maybe he's a little shady. He does a lot of strange things that are seemingly unexplained, but he governs the city and he's more of a technocrat in that manner. I actually am surprised. I'm glad that you brought this up, Jim, because people aren't talking about Eric Adams as much as they should. They're like, oh, it's over, it's done, it's spent. If you look at the way the voters came out, Women went for Cuomo, which is interesting, but also so did the poor people of the city. It's the wealthy elites and the future progressives that went for the winner. But this is not the winner of the contest. And Eric Adams, this is probably a shot in the arm for his campaign because he would not have beaten Cuomo.
All right, we have to get to what Donald Trump said about this guy because it might be the best that he has ever happened. He says, it's finally happened. The Democrats have crossed the line. Zohran Mamdani, 100% communist lunatic, has just won the Democratic Party on his way to becoming mayor. We've had radical leftists before, but this is getting a little ridiculous. He looks terrible. His voice is grating. He's not very smart. He's got AOC +3 dummies, all caps, by the way, backing him. Even our great Palestinian senator, crying Chuck Schumer, is groveling over him. Yes, this is a big moment in our history for our country. Donald Trump.
This is a moment, the tipping point for the Democratic Party, it seems, especially if he wins and becomes a champion. The left is winning the civil war that we've covered so closely here at the Mandate. And as these people who you love to hate, the Nancy Pelosi's, the Chuck Schumer's, the Joe Biden's, it turns out, we're going to find out that this boomer generation was holding back the onslaught of the young progressives who are doubling down on the policies that have been rejected by even moderate American voters. This is where the Democratic Party appears to be going.
And how did we get here, one might ask? Well, go ahead and watch the first block of this show where we talked about all the unfettered immigration that the Biden administration allowed into the country.
Yeah, this is what we're seeing. It's hard to keep track of all the different languages you hear in New York, which in some level you come, you're like, oh, that's cool. This is international. But when third world governance enters your first world city, well, that's another matter entirely.
You look at New York and like you're saying, oh, it's wonderful. It's a great place. Well, it used to be, and then the liberals took it over. I can't imagine if they take this next step, how much worse it will actually be. The once greatest city in the whole world could just become a dumping grounds, right? Like we see what happened in London already.
Yeah, you see it. It's sad. London doesn't look remotely like England. If you want to get to see England, you have to go outside of London, and it's not too far, actually. It's rather beautiful. But the United States has a beating heart in the way that Europe doesn't. You go through the heartlands, you see you'll see literal cowboys, you'll see people working, you'll see people on it, and we have a future. But New York, running out of time.
We are running out of time here on the show, but Bedford, always love having you here in Dallas. Thanks for watching, everybody. He'll be back here again tomorrow. We'll see you then.